The girl ran. Barefoot. Gasping for air. The cold pavement bit into her feet, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Her lungs burned. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. The night air was thick, heavy, pressing against her as if trying to slow her down. She dared not look back. Streetlights flickered above her, casting long, stretching shadows. The empty road ahead blurred through the tears stinging her eyes. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound sharp and sudden. The girl flinched but kept moving. She had to find someone. Someone who would listen. Someone who would help. And then, there she was. An elderly woman, standing near the porch of a small, quiet house. Gray hair, neatly tied back. A long cardigan wrapped around her frail frame. Her hands, thin and wrinkled, gripped a wooden cane. She looked like she had seen decades of life, the kind of person who knew things. Someone wise. The girl rushed forward, heart hammering. Please, her voice barely came out. Her throat felt raw. Help me. The woman's sharp eyes scanned her, taking in the bruises, the dirt-streaked face, the sheer terror in her wide eyes. What happened to you, child? The woman's voice was calm, steady. The girl couldn't answer. Her breaths came too fast, her chest rising and falling in quick, panicked gasps. The woman stepped closer. Are you in danger? The girl gave a tiny nod. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. She reached out and pulled the girl closer, her grip surprisingly strong for someone her age. And then, shaking, barely audible, the girl whispered something into the woman's ear. The woman froze. Her fingers tightened on her cane. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no words came out. A second later, her shaky fingers reached for the phone. She pressed 3 buttons. 911. Her voice was steady, but her hand trembled. I need an officer, she said, eyes still locked on the girl. Right now. 1 hour earlier. The girl sat by the window, staring outside. The world beyond the glass felt distant, like a place she no longer belonged to. The house was silent. Too silent. She could hear the wind rustling the trees outside, the occasional hum of a passing car. But inside, nothing. She swallowed hard. Her fingers curled against the fabric of her dress. She knew she shouldn't be here. She should have never come back. But she had no choice. A noise. The soft creak of a floorboard. Her body tensed. She turned her head slightly, listening. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Her breath hitched, she slid off the chair, careful not to make a sound. Every instinct in her body screamed run, but she couldn't, not yet. She needed to be sure. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Then, a knock. Gentle. Controlled. She squeezed her eyes shut. And then, the voice. Low. Smooth. I know you're in there. A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't answer. A long pause. Then, the door handle turned, once, twice, before the person on the other side gave up. Silence. Had they left? She waited, breath held, heart hammering. Then, bang. The door rattled in its frame. She jumped back, her pulse spiking. Another bang. And another. Panic surged through her. She turned, rushing toward the back door. Hands fumbling, she unlocked it, pushed it open. Cold air hit her face. She ran. Present. The elderly woman kept her gaze on the girl as she spoke into the phone. Yes, I'll stay with her. But you need to hurry. The girl's fingers clutched at the woman's sleeve. They're coming, she whispered, her voice hoarse with fear. The woman's grip tightened around her cane. Not if I can help it. In the distance, the sound of sirens cut through the night. The sirens were getting closer. The girl clung to the old woman's sleeve, her breath shaky, her thin body trembling. Her bare feet ached from running, but she didn't care. Somewhere in the distance, hidden in the shadows, she knew they were still out there. Watching. Waiting. The woman placed a firm, reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. You're safe now. But the girl knew better. The police weren't here yet. And until they were, she wasn't safe. The woman's porch light buzzed softly, casting a dim glow onto the quiet street. Everything seemed still, too still. The girl glanced around nervously, scanning the dark spaces between houses, the tree-lined sidewalk, the empty road stretching ahead. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Then she saw it. A shadow.it moved swiftly, silently, slipping between the trees across the street. A figure, tall, hidden. The woman moved with calm urgency, double-checking the locks on the doors, making sure the curtains were drawn. Then she picked up the phone again. The girl says someone is outside, she told the dispatcher. Send officers now. The girl tore her gaze away from the window. They won't stop, she whispered. The woman turned to her. Who won't stop? The girl's throat tightened. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Should she tell her? Could she trust her? She had trusted before. And that had nearly cost her everything. A lump formed in her throat. It doesn't matter, she said finally. They always find me. The woman studied her for a long moment. Then, she stepped closer, lowering her voice. You whispered something to me outside, she said gently. Something that made me call 911. The girl swallowed hard. Tell me what it means. The girl's hands shook. Her chest tightened. A memory flashed in her mind, a locked door. A muffled cry. Heavy footsteps approaching. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing it away. But the woman was still waiting. Still watching her with kind, knowing eyes. So the girl took a shaky breath. And she whispered it again. The old woman paled. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. Outside, in the darkness. A car sat parked down the street. Its engine was off. Its windows tinted. And inside, two figures sat in silence, watching the old woman's house. One of them pulled out a phone. Dialed a number. A voice answered. She made it to a house, the man said. His fingers tapped impatiently against the steering wheel. But the old lady called the cops. A pause. Then, the voice on the other end spoke. Low. Cold. Take care of it. The man smirked. Thought you'd say that. He hung up. Then, without turning on the headlights, he started the car. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second felt like a hammer striking the girl's chest. The old woman still hadn't spoken. She just stared at the girl, her face pale, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The girl shifted nervously. Had she said too much? Outside, the wail of approaching sirens broke the silence. They're coming, the woman finally said, her voice steady but low. The police are almost here. The girl didn't respond. She just hugged her arms around herself, staring at the floor. The woman took a slow breath. Then, she asked the question again. What does it mean? The girl didn't want to say it again. Saying it once had been hard enough. But it didn't matter anymore. They were coming for her. And this time, she wouldn't get away. So she forced herself to speak. The words that changed everything. The girl lifted her head, locking eyes with the woman. She swallowed hard. It's a code, she whispered. The woman's brows knitted together. A code? The girl nodded. It means I escaped. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Before she could speak, headlights flashed outside. The girl spun toward the window. Her stomach dropped. That's not the police, she said. The woman moved quickly, switching off the lamp. The room fell into darkness, except for the eerie glow from the streetlights outside. Together, they watched as a black car slowed to a stop just a few houses down. A man stepped out. Then another. They didn't look around. They didn't hesitate. They knew exactly where they were going. The woman's heart pounded. Get away from the window, she whispered. But the girl couldn't move. She knew those men. She knew what they were capable of. And she knew, if they got inside, she wouldn't make it out again. A desperate plan. The woman grabbed the girl's wrist and pulled her back. She reached for the phone. But just as she did, the girl grabbed her arm. Wait, she said. Don't call. They'll hear. The woman hesitated, then nodded. Instead, she guided the girl toward the hallway. We have to get out the back, she whispered. But the girl's legs felt frozen. They'll catch us, she breathed. The woman tightened her grip. Not if we move now. The sound of footsteps echoed outside. The girl sucked in a sharp breath. Then she ran. The back door. The woman led her through the kitchen, her hands moving fast, unlocking the back door as quietly as possible. The girl stood behind her, gripping the counter, trying to steady her breathing. Then, a knock at the front door. Loud. Sharp. The woman tensed. Police, a deep voice called. Open up. The girl's eyes widened. She shook her head quickly. No, she whispered. The woman hesitated. Another knock, this time, harder. Ma'am, open the door. The woman turned to the girl, her mind racing. What if it's really them? The girl's stomach twisted. It's not, she whispered. The woman had no reason to believe her. But something in the girl's eyes made her pause. Outside, the knocks turned into pounding. We need to move, the woman whispered. She pushed the back door open. A rush of cool air hit them. The night stretched out before them, dark, quiet, full of places to hide. The woman grabbed the girl's hand. And together, they ran. The men break in. Behind them, the front door burst open. Heavy footsteps thundered inside. The men moved fast, searching, checking each room. One of them cursed under his breath. She's gone. The taller man clenched his jaw. He turned toward the back door. It was open. A slow smile spread across his face. She won't get far, he murmured. Then, without another word, he followed. The cold air stung the girl's face as she ran. Her legs burned, her breath came fast and sharp, but she didn't dare slow down. The woman ran beside her, gripping her hand tightly, guiding her through the darkness. Behind them, heavy footsteps. The men were coming. The girl didn't look back. She didn't have to. She could hear them. And she knew, if they were caught, this time, she wouldn't escape. Nowhere left to hide. They cut through the neighbor's yard, sprinting toward the alley behind the houses. The woman's grip was strong, but her breathing was ragged. She wasn't used to running. The girl knew she couldn't keep this up for long. We have to hide, the girl panted. The woman scanned the alley, her mind racing. Trash bins. Fences. Parked cars. Nothing felt safe. Then, she spotted it. A small wooden shed, half hidden behind an old garage. She pulled the girl toward it, yanking open the door. The inside was cramped, filled with gardening tools and broken furniture. It smelled like dust and damp wood. But it would have to do. She pushed the girl inside, then slipped in after her, pulling the door shut just as. Footsteps. Right outside. The hunters close in. The girl pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to quiet her breathing. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, she could see them. The taller man stopped just a few feet away, his eyes scanning the alley. His partner muttered something, glancing around. They couldn't have gone far, the taller one growled. The other man nodded, pulling something from his jacket. The girl's stomach twisted. A gun, she clenched her fists, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. The woman stiffened beside her. Outside, the taller man stepped closer. His eyes flicked toward the shed. The girl held her breath. Then. His phone rang. The sound shattered the silence. He cursed, snatching it from his pocket. "What?" he barked. A pause. Then, his expression darkened. He listened for a moment, then turned to his partner. "Change of plans." His voice was sharp, angry. "Leave them. We've got bigger problems." The girl didn't move. She barely dared to hope. The other man hesitated. Then he sighed, tucking the gun away. "Fine," he muttered. The taller man shot one last glance at the shed. Then, just like that, they were gone. A moment of relief. The girl didn't move until she could no longer hear their footsteps. She waited, 1 second, 2, 3, before she finally let out a shaky breath. The woman exhaled beside her, pressing a hand to her chest. For a long moment, they just sat there, breathing in the dusty air, letting the fear settle. Then, softly, the woman whispered, "Who are they?" The girl's throat tightened. She closed her eyes. Then, finally, she spoke. "They work for him." The woman frowned. "Who?" The girl swallowed hard. And when she answered, her voice barely more than a whisper. The woman felt a chill run down her spine. "My father." The woman felt a chill crawl up her spine. For the first time since this ordeal began, she realized just how deep this went. The girl wasn't running from strangers. She was running from her own father. The thought made her stomach turn. She had assumed this was some criminal situation, maybe a kidnapping, maybe a case of human trafficking. But this? This was worse. The girl's own family was after her. And judging by the way those men had been hunting her, this wasn't a case of a father searching for a missing child. This was something far darker. A father's shadow. The woman swallowed, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you mean, your father?" The girl's arms tightened around her knees. She didn't look up. She stared at the dusty floor of the shed, her whole body trembling. "He's not like other fathers," she murmured. The woman waited. The girl took a shaky breath. "He controls everything," she whispered. "Every person in my life. Every place I go. What I eat. What I wear. Who I talk to." Her fingers dug into her arms. "I couldn't breathe in that house. Couldn't think. And if I ever disobeyed." Her voice trailed off. But she didn't need to finish the sentence. The woman could hear the pain in her voice. Could see the scars, maybe not on her skin, but in her eyes. This girl had suffered. And now she was running for her life. The hunt isn't over. A gust of wind rattled the walls of the shed, making the woman flinch. She forced herself to focus. They weren't safe here. If those men came back. She couldn't let herself think about that. She had to act. She placed a hand on the girl's arm. "We need to leave," she whispered. The girl stiffened. "But where will we go?" The woman hesitated. "They couldn't go home. And they couldn't go to the police, not yet. Not until she knew exactly what they were dealing with. Then, an idea struck her. "I know someone," she said. "Someone who can help." A desperate call. The woman pulled out her phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her contacts. She found the number. Pressed call. The line rang. Once. Twice. Her heart pounded. Then. A deep, calm voice answered. "Hello?" The woman swallowed. "It's me. I need your help." Silence. Then. "Where are you?" She glanced at the girl, then out the cracked wooden door of the shed. "We're in trouble," she said softly. A pause. Then. "Send me your location." The woman exhaled, relief flooding through her. "Thank you," she whispered. "No questions right now," the voice said. "Just hold tight. I'm on my way." The call ended. The girl stared at her. "Who was that?" The woman hesitated. Then. "A friend. Escape into the unknown. They couldn't wait here." Even though the men had left, the woman knew they weren't gone. They were still out there. Still searching. She peeked outside. The alley was dark and empty. For now. She turned to the girl. "We have to move." The girl's fear was clear, but she nodded. Carefully, they slipped out of the shed, sticking close to the shadows. The city was quiet at this hour. But silence didn't mean safety. Every distant car engine, every rustling leaf, sent shivers down their spines. They kept moving. Block after block. Street after street. Then. A black SUV pulled up. The headlights flashed once. The window rolled down. A man's sharp eyes met the woman's. "Get in," he said. The woman hesitated for only a second. Then she turned to the girl. "Trust me." The girl swallowed hard. Then, together, they stepped into the unknown. The moment the car doors shut, the girl shrank into the seat, pressing herself against the door. Her breath was uneven. Her hands trembled in her lap. The woman turned to the driver. A man in his late 40s, rugged but composed. His sharp eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Start talking," he said, his voice low. The woman hesitated. "I don't have all the details yet," she admitted. "But she's in danger. Real danger." The man didn't ask who. His eyes had already settled on the girl. "Who's after her?" The girl flinched at the question. The woman gave her a reassuring nod. Then, softly, the girl whispered. "My father." A name that means power. Silence. The man's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "What's his name?" he asked. The girl hesitated. Then. She spoke his name. The reaction was immediate. The man exhaled sharply, his knuckles turning white. The woman frowned. "You know him?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled the car over to the side of the road and killed the engine. Then, turning slowly in his seat, he looked the woman dead in the eye. "You have no idea what you just stepped into." The woman's stomach tightened. Secrets no one should know. "He's not just her father," the man continued. "He's dangerous. Connected. People who cross him don't walk away." The girl lowered her head, wrapping her arms around herself. The woman's mouth went dry. She had assumed this was a case of abuse. A cruel, controlling parent. But now. It was becoming clear. This was so much more. The man sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. If he's after her, that means he's already pulling strings. The cops, the media, anyone he can use. This isn't just about getting his daughter back. It's about control. And he'll do whatever it takes to make sure she never speaks a word about him. A chill ran through the woman. What do we do? She asked. The man studied the girl for a long moment. Then he said, we disappear. Nowhere is safe. The car was back on the road in seconds. Streetlights blurred past. The woman clenched her fists, trying to stay calm. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere no one will think to look, the man said. The girl tensed. He'll find me, she murmured. He always does. The man glanced at her in the mirror. Not this time, he said. But there was something in his voice. Something that sounded almost uncertain. The woman caught it. You don't think we can outrun him, do you? The man was quiet. Then he sighed. People like him don't lose. They don't stop. He'll come for her. And when he does, we have two options. He paused. We run for the rest of our lives. Or we fight back. The woman felt her heart pound. Fight back how? The man's grip tightened on the wheel. By finding out exactly what he's hiding. A risk that could cost everything. The woman hesitated. This was dangerous. More dangerous than anything she had ever imagined. But one look at the girl. At her fear. At the hopelessness in her eyes. And the woman knew. They couldn't run forever. She took a deep breath. Then we start digging. The man nodded. Good. Because I already know where to start. The girl looked up. Where? The man's eyes darkened. With the last person who tried to run from him. The woman's stomach dropped. You mean, there was someone else? The man didn't blink. Yeah. A heavy silence filled the car. Then. He spoke. But they didn't make it. The air inside the car felt heavy. No one spoke for a long moment. The girl's breath hitched. The woman turned to the man. You said someone else tried to run before, she said, her voice low. Who was it? The man exhaled sharply. A woman, he said. She was close to him once. Closer than anyone. The girl stiffened. Do you mean my mother? The man hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. She knew something. Something big. And when she tried to leave, she vanished. The girl's hands clenched into fists. He told me she was dead. The man glanced at her in the rearview mirror. That's what he wanted you to believe. A dangerous lead. The woman's pulse pounded. This changed everything. If the girl's mother had tried to escape and disappeared, then maybe, just maybe, she was still out there. Do you have any proof? The woman asked. The man sighed. Nothing solid. Just whispers. But if she's alive, she's in hiding. And there's one person who might know where she is. The girl sat up straight. Who? The man's jaw tightened. His brother. The girl's stomach turned. My uncle? The man nodded. He's the only one who ever stood up to your father. But they had a falling out years ago. No one's heard from him since. The woman frowned. Then how do we find him? The man flexed his fingers on the wheel. That's the tricky part. He disappeared off the grid. But I know someone who can track him down. The girl's eyes filled with hope. Then let's go. The man hesitated. It's not that simple. If we do this, we can't turn back. If your father catches wind that we're looking for his brother, he'll come at us with everything he has. A silence settled in. Then the woman spoke. Then we don't give him the chance. The hunt begins. The man made a sharp turn onto a deserted road. They drove for miles. The city lights faded into the distance, replaced by empty highways and long stretches of forest. Finally, he pulled into an abandoned parking lot. A single street lamp flickered above. "Stay in the car," he told them. Then he stepped out. The woman watched as he walked toward a payphone, his broad shoulders tense. She turned to the girl. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The girl met her gaze. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. The woman swallowed hard. Before she could respond, the man returned. He got in, shutting the door behind him. "Well?" the woman asked. He took a deep breath. "I found him." The girl's eyes widened. "Where?" The man shifted into drive. "A place no one dares to go. The forgotten town." They drove through the night. The further they went, the more desolate the roads became. By sunrise, they reached an old, forgotten town, nothing but boarded-up buildings and empty streets. The girl shivered. "Why would my uncle be here?" The man didn't answer right away. Finally, he muttered, "Because it's the last place your father would look." They pulled up in front of a rundown house. The windows were covered with thick curtains. The door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The man turned to them. "Stay close." They got out. The woman felt the hairs on her arms rise as they walked to the door. The man knocked, 3 times, slow and steady. A long pause. Then, a lock clicked. The door creaked open an inch, revealing a pair of sharp, wary eyes. The moment they landed on the girl, they widened in shock. Then the door swung open. A tall man stood in the doorway, his face lined with age but his gaze still piercing. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. The girl took a step forward. "Uncle, is my mother alive?" The man's face darkened. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Yes." The girl's breath caught in her throat. For years, she had believed her mother was gone, another victim of her father's wrath. But now, standing face to face with the only person who might hold the truth, her heart pounded with both hope and fear. Her uncle stepped aside, glancing over their shoulders as if expecting someone to follow them. "Get inside." Quickly. They entered the dimly lit house. Dust covered the wooden floors, and the air smelled of old books and forgotten time. The windows were boarded shut, casting long shadows on the walls. The man who had helped them escape stayed near the door, watching the street through a narrow gap in the curtain. The girl swallowed hard. "Where is she?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Her uncle's expression hardened. "She's alive. But she's not safe." A web of lies. The woman stepped forward. "You need to tell us everything. We don't have time for riddles." The uncle sighed, rubbing his temples. "I tried to get her out years ago. I failed." His voice was heavy with regret. "She was caught before she could escape. But she managed to get a message to me. She told me not to come for her, not until it was safe." The girl's hands trembled. "You left her behind?" The man's eyes darkened. "If I had gone back, I would be dead." He looked at the girl. "And then you would never have known the truth." Tears welled in her eyes. "So she's still with him?" Her uncle hesitated. "No. She's somewhere even worse." The girl's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" The man by the window turned to them. "Your father is powerful, but he has enemies. There's a reason he let you believe your mother was dead." The uncle nodded grimly. "He traded her." The girl's legs nearly gave out. "He what?" "He made a deal. To protect himself. And she was the price. A desperate plan." The woman clenched her fists. "Who did he give her to?" The uncle hesitated. A man far more dangerous than your father. A man who doesn't lose what's his. A thick silence filled the room. Then the girl spoke, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Then we take her back. The uncle let out a bitter laugh. You have no idea who you're up against. The man by the window turned to them. Then tell us. The uncle sighed. His name is Victor Langley. He owns people. He owns cities. He doesn't just take prisoners, he makes them disappear. The woman exchanged a look with the man. Do you know where he's keeping her? She asked. The uncle hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. There's a private estate outside the city. Guards. Surveillance. If she's alive, she's there. The girl straightened her back. Then we go. Her uncle shook his head. This isn't a mission. This is suicide. The woman looked him straight in the eyes. So was coming here. And yet, we're still standing. Breaking in. They didn't have weapons. They didn't have backup. But they had something more powerful, desperation. Under the cover of night, they approached the estate. The property stretched for miles, hidden behind thick iron gates and armed guards. The uncle had a plan, an old underground tunnel, forgotten by time. If they were lucky, it would still lead inside. The girl's pulse raced as they crawled through the damp passageway, the air thick with dirt and decay. They reached a rusted door at the end. The uncle turned the handle. It didn't budge. The man who had helped them escape pulled out a crowbar and wedged it beneath the frame. With a low groan, the door gave way. They stepped into darkness. The estate loomed above them, its towering walls casting shadows under the moonlight. The uncle led the way, moving fast and silent. The girl's breath came in short bursts. Then, a light flickered ahead. Footsteps. Someone was coming. They pressed themselves against the wall. A guard passed, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Then, just as quickly, he was gone. They moved one by one, they slipped inside. The final confrontation. The uncle led them through a narrow hallway. Then he stopped. A locked door stood in front of them. This is it, he whispered. The girl's heart pounded. Her mother was on the other side. The man pulled out a small device and pressed it against the keypad. The lock blinked red, then green. The door clicked open. The girl stepped inside. And froze. A woman sat in the corner of the dimly lit room. Her hair was longer, streaked with silver. Her body was thinner, frail. But when she lifted her head, her eyes, those familiar, warm eyes, met hers. The girl's breath hitched. Mom? Tears spilled down the woman's cheeks. My baby, she whispered. The girl ran to her, collapsing into her arms. The woman held her tight, sobs shaking her body. You're alive, the girl cried. The woman cupped her face. And you're free. The uncle stepped forward. We need to go. Now. The woman's expression hardened. No. The girl's stomach dropped. What? Her mother looked past her, toward the door. He's coming. A heavy silence fell over them. Then, from the hallway. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. A shadow appeared in the doorway. A tall figure stepped inside. Victor Langley. His lips curled into a smirk. You really thought you could take what's mine? The air turned ice cold. The girl grabbed her mother's hand. But her mother didn't move. Instead, she stood tall. Not anymore, she said. Victor's eyes darkened. Then. The uncle pulled out a small remote and pressed a button. An alarm blared. The room flashed red. The estate's security system shut down. The woman grabbed the girl's hand. "Run!" They bolted. Shouts echoed behind them. But they didn't stop. They raced through the tunnel, the sound of chaos filling the night. They ran until they reached the car, the engine roaring to life. And then they were gone. A new beginning. The girl stared out the window, her mother's hand clasped tightly in hers. They had done it. They had won. But as the city lights grew closer, she knew. This was just the beginning. Her father was still out there. Victor Langley would come for them. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She had survived. And she would never be powerless again. The car sped through the night, the engines roared deafening in the silence between the girl and her mother. As they passed through the city's outskirts, the bright lights of civilization slowly faded behind them, replaced by the black emptiness of the road ahead. The girl sat rigid in the passenger seat, her fingers clenched tightly around her mother's hand. Her mother's face was pale, her eyes distant, haunted by years of fear and captivity. She hadn't spoken much since they'd escaped the estate, and the girl understood why. The trauma of the past would take more than just time to heal. "We're safe now," the girl whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to reassure. Her mother gave a soft, almost imperceptible nod but didn't answer. It was clear that the reality of their escape hadn't sunk in yet. The girl had imagined this moment 1,000 times, her mother finally free from the clutches of Victor Langley and her father. But now that it had happened, it felt like something was missing. The weight of all the years lost, the wounds that would never heal, hung heavily in the air. "Where will we go?" Her mother's voice broke through the silence, soft but steady. "What now?" The question hit the girl harder than she expected. What now? They were free, yes, but that didn't mean their troubles were over. Her father was still out there, a dangerous man with resources beyond their reach. And Victor Langley? He wouldn't let this go. He would come for them, and when he did, he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. "I don't know yet," the girl said, her voice thick with emotion. "But we'll figure it out. We'll be okay." Her mother gave her a faint, tired smile. "You've grown so much. I've missed so much of your life." The girl bit back tears. "I've missed you, too. But we're together now. We'll rebuild." But the girl knew, deep down, that it wasn't going to be that simple. The small motel they stopped at for the night was nothing special, old, worn out, and lacking in comfort. But it was the kind of place where they could disappear for a few hours, rest, and plan their next move without drawing attention. They paid for the room in cash and quickly settled in. Her mother fell asleep almost immediately, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. But the girl couldn't sleep. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had happened, everything she had learned about her father and his deal with Victor Langley. She thought about the uncle's words, about the man who had been willing to risk his life to help them. The truth he had revealed had shaken her to the core. Her father had traded her mother to protect himself, and now Victor Langley had the power to destroy everything. The girl had no illusions about the danger they were in. They couldn't hide forever. And they couldn't do it alone. The girl knew they needed help, strong allies, people who could fight back against the forces that wanted to destroy them. But who could they trust? The world was full of enemies, and it felt like everyone they had ever known had betrayed them in one way or another. Her mind drifted back to Victor Langley's face, the cold smirk that had twisted his lips when he'd walked into the room. The girl could still see his eyes, full of malice and greed, and she knew that the man wouldn't give up easily. He had taken her mother once, and he would try again. The girl clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let anyone else control her mother's fate. But how? How could they possibly stand up to someone like Victor Langley? He had wealth, power, connections. He could destroy lives with a snap of his fingers. Suddenly, a thought hit her like a bolt of lightning. Her father. If there was one thing the girl knew for sure, it was that her father had a network. He had built it over the years, using his influence and wealth to manipulate people into doing his bidding. She didn't know the full extent of what he could do, but she knew he had powerful allies, enough to make things difficult for anyone who crossed him. What if her father's network could be used against him? The idea was dangerous. It was reckless. But it was the only thing that made sense. They needed to expose him. They needed to take away his power and make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Her hand instinctively reached for the small knife she had kept hidden in her bag. She had learned to be cautious, too many people had shown up uninvited in her life. She glanced toward her mother, who was still asleep, before slowly walking toward the door. She peered through the peephole, her heart skipping a beat when she saw who stood on the other side. It was her uncle. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door, her eyes scanning the hallway before she let him in. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low. "It's too dangerous." Her uncle gave a weary smile. "Dangerous? You have no idea what real danger is." He looked worn out, his clothes rumpled from days of travel. But there was something in his eyes, something more than just exhaustion. There was urgency, a sense that time was running out. "We have to talk," he said. "It's about your father." The girl's pulse quickened. "What do you know? Is he coming for us?" Her uncle ran a hand through his hair, pacing the small room. "He's not just coming for you. He's already made his move." The girl's heart sank. "What does that mean?" "He's making a deal with someone. Someone powerful. If he succeeds, it will change everything. He'll have control over more than just your life, more than just your mother's fate. He'll have the power to wipe you out completely. And no one will be able to stop him." What was her father up to now? The girl's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place, but not in a way she had ever imagined. The danger they had just escaped was nothing compared to what was coming. Her uncle's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. "We have to stop him," the girl whispered. Her uncle looked at her with a seriousness she had never seen before. "Stopping him won't be easy. But there is a way. We can expose him. We can take his network apart. But it will require everything we have." The silence that followed her uncle's words felt suffocating. The girl could hear her heartbeat in her ears, the rhythm quick and unsteady as she processed the gravity of what he had just said. Her father was making a deal, one that could give him the power to crush everything they had worked so hard to build. To erase them, to wipe their existence from the face of the earth. Her mother stirred in the corner, her brow furrowed in confusion, but the girl didn't look at her. She was focused on her uncle, his weathered face grim and tired, his eyes filled with a kind of resolve she hadn't seen before. He wasn't the same man who had been too scared to save her mother years ago. He had changed. And now, he was asking for her help in taking down the most dangerous man she had ever known. "Who is he making this deal with?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her uncle's gaze darkened, and he crossed the room, running a hand over his face as if to steel himself for the words he was about to say. "Someone we thought was dead," he said, his voice hoarse. "Someone who has been working in the shadows, pulling strings. Someone who was once your father's closest ally." The girl's stomach dropped. "Who?" Her uncle paused, as if measuring the weight of the revelation. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Victor Langley." The girl's breath hitched. She had thought Victor Langley was a man who operated alone, driven by his insatiable thirst for power. But the idea that her father, her own flesh and blood, could be in cahoots with the very man who had tormented her mother for years. It was more than she could comprehend. But, that doesn't make sense, she stammered. My father never trusted Langley. He was always too proud to align with anyone. Her uncle gave a bitter laugh. Pride doesn't protect you when you're facing a man like Langley. Your father's pride has always been his greatest weakness. He thought he could control Langley, use him to protect his empire. But Langley is a snake. And now your father is his pawn. The girl's mind raced. This deal, this partnership between her father and Langley, was going to tear apart everything. Her father had traded her mother's freedom for his own protection, but now, it seemed, he was willing to sacrifice her, and her mother, once again, this time at Langley's hands. Where is this happening? She demanded, her voice sharp with determination. Her uncle glanced at her, his eyes full of regret. There's a meeting. It's happening tonight. They're finalizing their deal. If we can't stop it, it will be too late. The girl didn't hesitate. She had to stop this. She had to expose her father for the monster he truly was, and she needed to do it before it was too late. She turned to her mother, whose eyes were wide with confusion. Mom, we have to go. It's our only chance to put an end to this, the girl said, urgency in her voice. Her mother's gaze flickered with uncertainty, but she nodded, determination slowly replacing the fear in her eyes. We can't just let him do this, to us, to anyone else. The girl's heart swelled with pride for the woman who had endured so much and yet still had the strength to fight. They were no longer victims. They were warriors, and it was time to finish what they had started. Her uncle led them to the back of the motel, where a car was waiting. It was an old, nondescript sedan, perfect for blending in. As they climbed into the car, the girl's mind went into overdrive. She had no illusions about what was to come. Tonight wasn't just about taking down her father's empire. It was about taking down a legacy of lies, betrayal, and destruction. The ride to the meeting location was tense, the air thick with anticipation and fear. Her mother sat quietly beside her, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. Her uncle was silent too, his jaw set in a grim line as he navigated the dark, winding streets. The meeting was to take place at an abandoned warehouse just outside the city, isolated, surrounded by empty fields. Perfect for a clandestine deal, where nothing could be traced back to the parties involved. It was the perfect place for a betrayal. When they arrived, the girl's heart was in her throat. The warehouse loomed in front of them, dark and foreboding. No lights, no movement. But she knew that inside, her father and Victor Langley would be waiting. Her uncle parked the car a few blocks away, and they got out, moving quickly toward the building. The plan was simple: get in, expose her father and Langley, and get out before they had a chance to react. But nothing was ever simple with her father. And nothing was ever simple with Victor Langley. They crept up to the warehouse, moving through the shadows. Her uncle had a plan, an old, abandoned fire escape at the back of the building that would lead them to a second-floor window. It was their only chance. When they reached the fire escape, her uncle began to climb, his movements quick and practiced. The girl followed, her heart pounding in her chest. As they reached the top, she could see through the grimy window, a scene that would change everything. Her father stood at the far side of the room, his back to them. Victor Langley was facing him, his cold eyes glinting in the dim light. There were two other men present, and the girl could see the briefcases on the table between them, the deals being made, the lives being sold. Her heart stopped. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The truth. The final confrontation. Without thinking, the girl pushed open the window and stepped inside. Her uncle followed her, and they landed in the dimly lit room with a soft thud. Her father turned, his face twisting in surprise and then fury. "You," he spat. "You should have stayed out of this." Victor Langley's smirk widened. "I thought you'd keep her out of the picture, but I guess some things are too important to hide. Her father stepped toward her, his eyes cold and calculating. You don't understand, do you? This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. I had to do this to survive. The girl stood tall, her fear melting into a cold, unyielding rage. You didn't just do this to survive. You did this to destroy us. To destroy anyone who got in your way. Victor's eyes gleamed as he took a step forward, his presence filling the room. You're not going to win this. This is how the world works. You're just a pawn, like your mother. Like your father. Her uncle pulled out a small device, pressing a button that sent a shockwave through the building. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered. The final betrayal. In the chaos that ensued, the girl and her mother bolted for the door, her uncle close behind. Her father's voice, filled with rage, echoed behind them, but it was too late. The damage was done. They had exposed him. And now, there was no going back.